This podcast is rated IS for incredibly silly and definitely contains bad words, bad jokes, and other bad content that should not be heard by anyone, least of all children. Or maybe it should be. We don't know. We're still not their parents. You're listening to the Starforge podcast with Scya and Mal, two nerdy humans who still have a lot to say about Star Wars: The Old Republic and all its features. Rest assured, the podcast is, as always, working as intended. This is episode 15, StarParse. Beep, beep, beep.
That's fucking parking lot beside my door. It's very quiet here except for that.
Beep, beep, beep. It's very quiet here, except for the cars.
Oh, really?
It's the same in my neighborhood.
Like, there's
it's very quiet until the ambulance goes by, helicopters.
I'll take that over like 18 kids in the same apartment, party hardcore on the other floor. Yeah, that was my old place.
Oof. Yeah,
I may have been the perpetrator of the party house at one point. I'm sorry. I had a roommate who liked to make noise. Wait, we're recording right now. Gosh darn it.
We are. And this is disappointing other people while flying solo. All right, well, let's just go right into it because we have a lot of awesome and amazing information to get into. So, Scya, tell me a little bit about this parsing situation.
So when you're playing any type of content in Star Wars: The Old Republic, when you hit things with your lightsaber or your blaster, ka-chew, you do a certain amount of damage. If you have fly text enabled, the amount of damage you do will show up as a little piece of text on the screen floating around. But how do you know how much damage you're doing over the course of a fight? How do you know if you're doing well or if you need to get better? Parsing is the act of measuring how much damage or healing you're doing, comparing it with others, and practicing getting better by seeing exactly how much damage you're doing with your parse. We're going to be talking about both solo and group stuff today, so whether you want to get better alone or get better to be a better team member, whether you're taking on the most difficult content in the game, whatever you're trying to do, parsing is a really satisfying way of getting better at your class.
So, Scya, how am I going to get better at my class? Am I just going to tally up all those numbers in my head and ask a friend to tally up those numbers and compare? What do I do?
Unfortunately, well, your friend can't help you tally it all. Right now, it's a totally solo task. So at the time of recording this, you can only track your own damage and healing numbers. There's no such thing as group combat logging that keeps track of everyone's combat numbers, like there is in other games like World of Warcraft and Final Fantasy. That means there's no way for your team members to know how much damage, or how little, or healing you're doing, or for you to know how well they are doing.
So, to kick this off, let's do a very brief history of parsers, and this might not even be all of them, but these are the big ones and the ones that I know. So I'll start with this one of the first, the Mox parser, and I actually met the guy who made this parser at the very first cantina Swtor ever had. He was very nice.
You met somebody famous.
Yeah. And it appears to not have been updated since January 2013, but it was one of the first ones available, albeit short-lived. Another brief tool people used was called StarParse, but I believe that hasn't really been used since 2014. The first big one that I really used to improve myself was called Parsec.
I remember that one, yeah.
Yeah, it has a very user-friendly look to it, and it was used in our raid group for many years. Parsec was a little bit fiddly if you were on a Sage. To get the correct SPS numbers, you had to enter something special in the settings to make sure it was synced correctly, and sometimes it still didn't work correctly. At this point, I barely remember what I did yesterday, let alone what I did in Parsec 7 years ago when I was using that, because at some point something happened and it broke, and everyone kind of switched over to StarParse, which is pretty much the one I would say 95% of people who play the game use to parse.
StarParse is just the tool people use to parse. It's free, it functions, and it has been that way for quite a while. Pretty much everyone uses it. There's not really any great alternatives that people will suggest. So you can be confident in your choice of your parsing tool. But before we talk more about StarParse and how to use it, there is a website called Parsley. The address is parsley.io, like parsley like the herb, that you can use to visit and see combat logs people have uploaded. The main way I personally use this site is for when people ask me, what is the best class? What is the most awesome class? What's the best one? It's the only real source we have for numbers about how well classes are performing. The website also has leaderboards for boss fights in the game, broken down by difficulty, whether you're doing 8-man or 16-man, and if you're a DPS or healer. You can actually upload logs directly to Parsley if you have entered the account info saved in StarParse. Parsley also indicates if the person who uploaded a log used a nightmare crystal or not, so those people aren't pulling anything over anyone. Oh, that was written by Mal. I'm not poo-pooing on your nightmare crystals.
Well, I'm not, but how are you going to upload a log? Oh, I'm the best DPS, and I'm going to be sneaky about it because I used a nightmare crystal. Ooh. You know, strangely enough, look at the top DPS logs on the leaderboard. I would say 100% of them were done without the use of a nightmare crystal, which lends credit to my prior argument in a prior episode that a nightmare crystal cannot make you press your buttons and know your class better. Ha!
Right, skill over gear and or special fancy items. So let's get right into StarParse, what it means, how it's useful, and why you should not be intimidated by it, and why now is a great time to start learning to use it. So why now, Mal? After so many years of parsing tools being available, why is now the time?
Well, I would like to quote the creator of StarParse, Ixale, September 17th, 2021. So apparently, the SWTOR devs got inspired by WoW, and the combat logging is getting a significant revamp, with group logging as well. So the jig is up. If you are scared people will know what you're doing in the game or how well you're doing, they will after 7.0. There are no secrets. So head on over to ixparse.com and get on the train.
Me and Mal had a great conversation about this before we started recording, and that was the idea that, well, guess what? Your teammates can probably already tell if you're doing good or bad just by watching you, especially your more experienced team members and your raid leaders. I promise you, we'll talk more about my experience with parsing soon, but I can tell just as a raid leader whether you're facing the boss, whether you're in the right spot or not, and, well, how quickly you're clicking those buttons. Here comes the dreaded question, though.
Scya, do you use StarParse?
Okay. All right. I have been raiding for approximately 10 years. I am in the Nightmare Mode raiding group with Mal. I do not use StarParse on a regular basis. I only turn it on when other people ask me to. So I do have a reason though. I have tanked for pretty much all my Nightmare Mode raiding career. And the tank is the least useful role to parse on. Not saying that it's useless by any means. A skilled tank will absolutely take advantage of StarParse, but between DPS and healing, tanking numbers don't mean quite as much because it's more important that you, 1, stay alive, and 2, well, get the boss where it needs to go. So I've never had as much of a need to. However, when I do play damage characters, and there's a couple that I really like, I've never played at that super hardcore level where you need to meet those numbers or you are going to crash your team. You won't be able to progress if you are not meeting them. And I also know that I will probably never be good enough to meet those numbers anyway. So who cares? I'm just going to press my buttons as good as possible.
All right, well, good for you for downloading and using StarParse on DPS and for starting to use it on your tank, because it can be useful on a tank. Because if you have a sage in your group who's bubbling and you as a tank are not in StarParse, wow, are you really robbing them of that of those numbers? Because you're
not for long. Soon we're gonna have group combat logging.
For now, you're robbing Aravale.
I was fully expecting you. I was expecting you to shame me for not having StarParse on, and it's definitely something when people see I don't use StarParse or I say I don't use StarParse, most Nightmare Mode raiders will be like, what are you doing? What is wrong with you? Wait, you don't keybind? What the hell? We don't need to talk about that today, but if you're very interested in doing Nightmare Mode operations, you must be parsing. You must have StarParse on, or you will encounter a lot of issues going into that type of content. But we will talk a little more about why you might want to do it solo or for more casual content too.
It's true. So let's assume you fine humans have downloaded StarParse. Now you need to make sure combat logging is actually turned on in Swtor. Why is this not a default setting? Why? Why do they make things so hard for people?
I have no idea.
Sorry, tell the people how the fuck to turn on the combat logging.
All right, so this setting should be on by default as Mal is crying over in the corner over there. But to turn it on, you press Escape on your keyboard on the top left while logged into the game. Choose Preferences from the menu, then go to the Combat Logging tab on the left, and lastly check the box that says Enable Combat Logging to a file and press OK. This will take those numbers that show up on the screen, the fly text, and it will automatically save them to a text file. As a person, you will not be able to read this file very easily. That's where a parsing tool comes in handy. It's a machine, a program, a computer, whatever you want to call it, that will read that file and show it to you in a way that makes sense. You may also need to know where your combat logs are saved automatically. So mine and most people's will be saved in My Documents in a folder called Star Wars: The Old Republic Combat Logs.
Show notes will have the technical path to that if you require it.
Along with some lovely screenshots of the stuff we're about to talk about next.
It's true. And you have more that I have good ones that I took that you haven't even seen yet that I will put in the folder. Anyway, okay, so
you heard it here. Mal has pics for me that I haven't seen in the folder.
It's true. You don't know how much coffee money she's given me this week. All right. So now you can use this fancy parser all by your lonesome to see how you're doing with DPS, heals, or tanking by simply pressing the parse button in the upper left-hand portion of the screen. This can still be beneficial to you even if you're just doing flashpoints or story. If you run into a problem, if you die or have trouble figuring out what's going on in a fight, you can come right into the parser and see what happened.
When players say they are parsing, this is exactly what they're doing. They've turned out that settings in Star Wars: The Old Republic. They've turned on the StarParse program that they downloaded from the StarParse website and clicked parse. They're attacking a training dummy on their ship while trying to get better at the rotation or priority system for their class. Like I said, this can be for players who want to practice to run solo content like Eternal Championship or the Master Mode chapters, or for players looking to get better at PvP, or players jumping into harder content like Operations. You pull up your favorite guide. I personally really like merlinsotor.com for beginner's guides. Follow along with the rotation, and then look at your numbers. As you get better at combat with your class, the numbers should go up. And if you're planning to play with friends or a guild who parses, they can usually give you an idea of what number goals you should be shooting for. This obviously changes for different types of content and will change every time the classes get updated. We're heading into the expansion. I don't want to give you any numbers because they're about to change.
But let's say you're ready to raid with a group. There are 4 options on the leftish side of StarParse: File, Interface, Timers, and Raiding. If you click Raid and then go to Settings, it opens up another menu where you can input a name and a password.
If you're playing with a regular group, you can ask them if there's a StarParse, and they'll usually give you the username and password to input.
I have no idea if there's a limit on how many StarParse groups you can have and store in StarParse, but I have 9 at the moment. I know other people who have like 16. So after that, I press the X on that box, head back to the main screen, and now when you click on Rating, you should see the group you just entered. Select that group, it gets a check mark next to it, then you want to press the Raid button in the upper right-hand corner, not Parse. If you press Parse, you will not load into the group, and you will have a bad time. So let's say you do one poll. Oh my gosh, there's information on the screen. So exciting. But it looks like a mess. It's gibberish to you. What language is this? I don't even know. So let's talk about what all that gibberish actually is.
If you haven't tried StarParse out yet, like I said, there will be screenshots of what Mal is talking about on starforgepodcast.com. Look for the episode about StarParse.
Yep. So let's start on the Raid tab. In the damage dealt box, the total is the amount of damage total you dealt to anything and everything in the fight you were killing. DPS is how much damage you did per second while doing that. Next up is threat, the total you generated and how much you generated per second. If you're a tank and someone is ripping the boss off of you, checking TPS can help you know who to guard. After that, damage taken. This tells you how much damage you took total and how much you took per second. In a lot of fights, if you have very high DTPS and someone of the same style of class does not, you might be missing a mechanic, or you might need to adjust something you're doing. Some fights, there's naturally a lot of damage going out. But again, if you seem to have very high numbers there and other people don't, speak up and try to diagnose the issue.
This is what I meant by earlier. Your raid leader can probably already tell you what's going wrong just by looking at you. Your raid leader or your tank may say, hey, you're standing here during this part of the fight, or hey, you're standing between me and the boss and taking extra damage. Those numbers just back it up and make it more obvious if you're not already aware yourself.
And don't accept, oh, you were standing in stupid, because a lot of people like to say that. Well, don't stand in stupid. That's not constructive advice, okay? Anyway, moving on to my favorite box, the healing box.
The healing box.
Again, here we have the total amount of healing you have done, how much healing per second you did, and a percentage. We'll talk about the percentages in a minute. Hold on to that thought. The next set of numbers you see are EHPS, which is your effective heals per second, which is the number that actually matters when it comes to healing. This basically means how much healing you did that was effective and actually healed people instead of just fluff healing.
What is fluff?
What is fluff? Fluff is there's nothing to be healed and you just stand there puffing out Colto Bomb after Colto Bomb and doing heal after heal after heal, even though everybody is 100% health and there's nothing to heal, just to make your HPS numbers look very, very large, as inflated as your fluffing ego. After this is a category that is particularly important for Sage and Sorc healers, APS, or SPS, as some people call it, absorb per second, shield per second. This tells you how much you shielded, i.e. bubble. If you're on a Sage and this number is low, you're doing it wrong. And it can also show things you shielded with cooldowns, stuff like that. So at the end of all of this is a percentage. If you roll over any of the names in StarParse, it will tell you the person's spec, their effective healing, DPS or damage taken rating, shielding done and received, and APM, which stands for actions per minute. The percentage is actually how well you did on a fight compared to other people who are using StarParse. So, for the example that I have in the folder, my heal percentage is 69, the best number in the galaxy, dudes. So that means 31% of people did better than that on this fight for my spec. The percentages are nice to see where you are, but I don't put too much stock in them, mostly because a lot depends on what is going on in the fight.
Especially in harder content, different players will have different roles in the fights that have mechanics, and that can really affect the numbers. If you're contributing to mechanics, you're still helping win the fight, even if you're not doing a majority of the damage.
Right, for example, maybe you have a melee DPS who was a little bit low on the DPS chart, but maybe it was because one of the tanks died, and that DPS ran over to taunt the boss to hold it for a few seconds and lost DPS that way. Or maybe things were going great, and there just wasn't too much to heal. I don't concern myself too much with the percentages. They are really just a lot of EPing points.
The most important thing at the end of the day is that you finish the fight. As long as everyone together reached the numbers that you needed, it doesn't matter if one person didn't do as amazing as they should have. But if you want to get better, this is the spot to watch.
What I do concern myself with here, and so should you, is APM, actions per minute. As my husband says, the way to succeed in SWTOR is ABP. Always be pressing. Always be pressing buttons.
Always be pressing, or in my case, always be clicking, or is that not allowed?
As you doing something. Like, don't just stand there. Just do anything. If you're really that confused on a DPS and you don't know what to do, if you got an off heal, like, my God, do that. Like, do anything. So, in the picture I referenced, it shows an APM of 38.72, which means I almost did 39 actions in a minute. If you find that you are lagging behind in healing, tanking, or DPS, look at your APM and see how it compares to someone else of the same class as you. For example, on my TK Sage Lightning Sork, I do at least 50 APM, sometimes less if it's a fight with a lot of pauses and breaks, like most of the fights in Dread Palace. Or sometimes it's even more than 50 APM, especially if it's just a hard mode raid and a straight parse fight like Red on Duxon. If you find in the parser that you are doing 30 APM on the same class, you might say, hey now, what are you doing that I'm not, and how can I change that? As long as the person or people you can ask are not total and complete assholes, I highly recommend that you start with that.
So as a tank, a lot of the time I spend is just dragging the boss around to the right location. But if you're spending a lot of time moving when you shouldn't be moving, well, that takes away from your ability to always be pressing.
Right. And like I said, in some fights, it can really vary. Like if you're doing Tyrans and you get simplification as a DPS 5 times, your APM is naturally going to be lower than somebody who got it not at all.
This sounds like a personal problem you have experienced yourself.
If you haven't played Dread Palace, I encourage you to do so and then start listening to this episode again because all my raid groups are in Dread Palace right now. Those are the best examples I got, kids. Anyway, let's work backwards in the tabs now and talk about the combat log. The number one reason this is useful is because it can tell you why you died. There is always a reason you died. There are a lot of bugs in SWTOR. There are a lot of bullshit ways to die in SWTOR. However, 90% of the time, you died because of a valid reason, and the parser will tell you why. Here we go. Last week, I was DPSing Apex Hard Mode 16-man, where the TPS check is a lot tighter than 8-man. So here's me. I died to a rocket salvo that hit me for 75k. Wait, what? 75k? Is that normal? Let's go to the tab of the combat log where there is a nifty search box. I can type in rocket to see what kind of damage rocket salvo had been doing to me in that fight. And would you look at that? Most of the rocket salvo hits on me were either no damage to 20k damage. No damage meant I was absorbing them with my force bubble or a cooldown. It also tells me that I died to 3 ticks of rocket salvo that were 75k each. That tells me the group failed DPS checks that caused the boss to essentially enrage and do triple damage. This tells me somewhere something needs to get better. This can also help you figure out what went wrong if you are killed by something crazy, like 0 damage. Sometimes it says you are killed by this boss with 0 damage, or it says something crazy like you were killed with negative 3,948,000,000 whatever damage. A lot of times that is something going wrong mechanically, like a death mark not getting cleansed in the Dread Council fight, etc.
So even if you aren't sure why you died, for example, I was low on health, I got hit, I died, you can check that log and you can tell your team, oh, I died from this ability and it did this much damage. Often someone in your team will go, oh, that's what happened. And you can work on doing better together as a group in the next fight.
The log can also tell you what type of damage the bosses do if you hover over the attack in StarParse, which helps with mitigation. There are different types of damage in the game, which shows up on the screen basically in fly text as yellow, which is force tech damage, or white, which is melee range damage. Bosses can do these types of damage, and in addition to that, they can also do energy and kinetic, internal, and elemental, which I'm not going to go into too much right now, but just be aware that that also factors into your mitigation. If the boss is only doing white damage, you popping resilience to gain 200% force tech resistance is not going to do shit. You popping saber reflect, which is used to reflect single target attacks, is not going to do shit if the boss is doing an AoE. There are many useful guides out there about damage types and how to mitigate them. Please go find them and help you help yourself make things easier for your playtime.
Each different defensive cooldown in the game works on certain types of damage. You can see what they work on when you roll over the tooltip. But if you're just casually fighting the boss, you probably have no idea what type of damage that boss or enemy is doing. And this is how you can find out through StarParse.
So moving away from the tabs down here, we're going to hit up the top of StarParse where it says timers.
As someone who doesn't really use StarParse for group content and trying to do more damage or healing, timers are one of the big things I adore about StarParse.
Right, they are super useful tools that StarParse has, and some are just built in when you download it. Like this timer I have in my example. Here it will tell you when Tyrants is sending out death marks on the Dread Palace Council fight. I mean, you can focus target Tyrants. Maybe somebody else, that's their job. But maybe you're focus targeting something else at that time, and maybe that person forgot to call it. Boom, your timer's going off. Now you know. However, what I use, and I know a couple other people use this as well, I use a crazy pack of StarParse timers, and I'm going to give you guys the link to that.
This will be a Dropbox link in the show notes.
Right. So I don't always use timers, but it's fun to play around and see what they are and how they work. If you're struggling on a mechanic, you can bet your ass there's a timer to help you with it. Do you have Doom in the Dreadguard fight? There's a timer to tell you when you have 5 seconds left on Doom so you can pop your cheese and not die. Like, oops, I forgot I had Doom. There's also a Dreadguard timer to tell you if you're growing a lovely green puddle of death under your feet. Like I said, most of the time, I don't have those on because I don't need them at this point. But if you are newer to raiding, don't be ashamed. They're a tool, and they can really, really help you. And then you'll go in the raid, and everybody will think that you're, just fucking professional and know everything.
The game and its fights were not designed to require any add-ons or timers or anything that you need to download outside of the game. They're meant to be used by your wits, by your experience with the raids, people learning and writing down the mechanics, and maybe just getting a feel for the fight or watching the buffs and debuffs. I don't continuously use timers, but there are a ton that can really help. For example, if you're running the bombs for the Temple of Sacrifice operation, I still have not figured out how to properly time that one without timers, and I continuously screw over my group every time I forget to open up StarParse for that one.
So another nifty thing I'm going to throw out about StarParse is the interface. If you click on Interface at the top of StarParse, you can pop out a little box that shows raid damage, raid heals, and raid threat. It also can pop out other things, raid challenges, but not all fights have that, so I don't usually have that on. These can help you see, as you're fighting, how you're doing. So if you need to pick it up during the fight, how things are going, blah, blah. For me, if I see mine take a dip, I know, oh my God, I probably don't have my dot on the boss. Better put that on there. Stop messing up. So also under the interface menu, you will find an option called Raid Hots. Now, hold on to your butts, because if you turn this on, it is going to make your healing life so much more pleasant.
I literally just learned about this today. So when you're healing on certain classes, especially some of our healers, you need to put little hots, heals over times, on your different team members. And the idea is you don't want to reapply it over and over and over because it's a big waste of time and energy and all of that. You only want to apply to people who aren't currently having it or about to run out.
Right. So if you turn on Raid Hots and you make sure that lock overlays is not checked, it's going to make a crazy gray and red grid pop up on your screen. There will be 8 boxes, 1 box for each member of your raid team. If you're doing a 16-man, it can be tedious to make this work, but it will. You just drag the corner of the box and make it bigger. Once you place an initial hot on all your group members, you will see their character name pop up in the grid. From there, you just need to adjust it and click on the names and move them into the right box so that they're actually over the correct person. And watch out for people swapping people around in the raid frames. People can be very sneaky about that and mess up what you're doing. When you're done, press Lock Overlays in the interface menu. Now when you tab back into the game, you will see a little lovely green box pop up next to that person's name if they have an active hot. When the hot falls off, the box goes away. This is very, 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 very valuable for commando, merc, and scoundrel op healers. So valuable. No more wasting GCDs, clicking on people in the raid frame, checking to see if they have packs still rolling on them or trauma probes still up. It will even tell you on a scoundrel if they have 1 or 2 packs. Although that can be a little janky sometimes. Sometimes it doesn't update quite quick enough. But anyway, it's not as useful on a Sage or a Sork because of how bubbles work. So I don't really use it on a Sage or a Sork, but that might change in 7.0. I'm not sure.
Is that because we already track it by the debuff that looks like a blue man waving at the moon?
Yeah, that could be. Yeah, basically, that's it. It's like pretty useless to give me the green box. Because the only other hot you have is, Resurgence. I forget what it's called on the imp side. But that's the only other hot you only have one, and it's not really, it's on a big cooldown. So it's not one like you're continuously rolling on people. But for now, this is an amazing tool to use on the other 2 heal classes. Set it up. Be amazing. Make your life easier.
So there you go. Now you know how to set up StarParse if you're a solo player, basically the basics of parsing and what all those numbers on the screen mean. And I hope you really enjoyed these more in-depth tips about raiding, especially as a healer, from Mal, who has been doing this a very long time now.
And that's it. That's all I have to say for now about StarParse. And now, to round out this very long episode, Scya is going to tell us the news. You heard it here last.
Is there fucking anything going on right now?
I'll just read what I wrote you.
As for the news in Star Wars The Old Republic, there is squat nothing going on right now, and Mal made me want to read a bunch of notes that said everything is over and nothing is started. We are waiting for the expansion that is launching on February 15th, 2022. As far as we can tell, it is actually launching. We got a new story trailer, which is visible on the Star Wars The Old Republic YouTube channel. The anniversary vendor is still there and will continue to be there all the way to 2023. The PTS is shut down, and we will not be able to see any more changes until it goes live in the expansion.
Wow. So what am I going to do for the next 2 weeks?
It's honestly a big question I think a lot of players are asking themselves. Other than wrapping up anything that you want to wrap up before the expansion, sit tight. Go play some Fortnite or whatever it is you kids do these days.
Fortnite. Oof. Anyway, that's all we have for today. We'll see you all next time.
Have a good one, everyone. Bye. You've been listening to the Starforge podcast with Scya and Mal. We know you have your choice of podcasts, and you chose the right one. New episodes drop every Friday on Google and Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Swtorista's YouTube channel, and just about every other podcast platform in existence. For show notes, pictures, and other information, visit starforgepodcast.com. Hit us up on Twitter at StarForgeCast. We love hearing from you. Thanks for tuning in. We'll see you all next week.
Right. So, let's see. Oh, segue to talk about group parsing.
Sorry, I needed.
So in this case, you don't write me a segue. That's nice.